Guys, I want to welcome you to another episode of the the Advisory Board Podcast. Sorry, I screwed up my own podcast name. The Advisory Board Podcast. It's a franchise podcast, bringing experts that know things extremely well that can give you actionable advice in the industry. I've got with me Dan Claps. This is a good friend of mine, and also just a stud. Somebody that I look up to, even though I'm quite a bit taller than he is. But he's a good guy, and he's an expert in so many things. So I thought it would be great to get him on and talk a little bit about founder journey, brands, things like that. But before I go, let me tell you about him. In case you don't know Dan, Dan's he's going to turn 31 soon, but he's been in franchising since he was young. Got into was it Murphy? I forget. It's into business resale.
That's right.
Transitioned into brokerage. He started a well-known lead generation company inside the franchise development space. So a lot of brokers and brands hit the leads from the company he founded. Still, he's recently broken out to become a franchisor, but to start a platform company, franchise Playbook. And these guys, they've assembled a rock star team. I know I'm not supposed to say that after the Super Bowl ad, but I'm saying it anyway because I believe it. And they just launched their first brand, their premier brand, Voda, cleaning and restoration. So, but before I screw anything else up, Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you? Tell us a little bit about Voda, and then we'll just jump in. Let's talk, and then we'll introduce the topic after that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dave, for having me on the podcast. Very excited to have this conversation. I would start with, I got into franchising in my early 20s at the age of 22. I know nothing else. I've really not been in any other industries, whether good or bad. And it's been my home, and it'll continue to be my home, and having fun. Switching gears to this other side as a franchisor has been an exhilarating experience so far.
Yeah, I'll bet. Well, the funny thing is, we were talking about this before, but it's like switching roles on the field, right? Like you played third base your whole life, and now you're like, oh, I'm catching. It's like a totally different. It's the same game, same ball, right? Same rules, but you're just on the other side of the field, so it's a little bit different. And I think that people are going to enjoy learning from you, kind of that journey you've been through. So I wanted to have you on to share some of that insight with people. But can we talk about Voda for a minute? Because I'm pretty excited about this brand. It's the first and only cleaning and restoration concept, right, in the franchise industry. Have I got that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Hey, so tell us just a little bit. What I want to talk about is you guys, as an emerging franchise platform company, you've got to pick a winner, right? You got to make sure that when we decide to franchise a company, we're going to cross every T and dot every I. So you guys have obviously done that. Can you share a little bit about this journey with us? Like, how did you guys narrow in on Voda, and why was that the right fit for you guys to start as your kind of premier franchise brand?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I always say that we're a franchisor that became a franchisor, not a business that became a franchisor. And there's something different, fundamentally different in that journey. Backstory, as you mentioned, I got into franchising in my early 20s because I had a business in college that was more of a job than a business. And I learned that it was not system oriented enough. It was too much me dependent, not system dependent. Right. And so I, moved on from that and started exploring franchises, and I fell in love with the franchise discovery process. So before I was a consultant, I was on the end of a franchise buyer. I was looking at options. And I found the process a bit arduous and time consuming and overwhelming. And so in learning about franchise consulting, I thought that would be a good fit. And at that time, a Murphy Business and Financial, which is a franchise for business brokers, you were able to join their system and do business brokerage and franchise consulting. And I thought that's perfect. I can work, both angles of that type of business. So I started with them at the age of 22. Funny story about it. The average age of a business broker is usually, maybe it's changed a bit now, but it's usually they're like 60s. And so all my friends got out of college. They were all going to ADP conference in Bahamas and here and there and all these fun conferences. And I was going to, Southern Florida, but for, I just didn't fit in, put it this way. When I went to the conference, loved Murphy, but I just wasn't like the normal demographic of age. And while there, I realized that there was one other person there, actually, Adrienne Lee, and she probably doesn't even remember this, but she's a top, franchise consultant, and now with another network. But at the time, she was part of Murphy, and I really felt like what she was doing was really cool. She was really focused on the franchise consulting, and so I started to go down that path. And through that, Murphy franchise, you had a membership to the IFPG network. And so I became a consultant with IFPG.
Yeah.
Did that for a bit of time, and then had the opportunity to co-found a lead gen company called Career Transition Leads with my previous partner. We built that up over the next 7 years from 2016 to 2022. But in that business, I was responsible for a lot of franchise placements, as well as some of my own franchise placements, where I really spent a lot of time learning what businesses were working and which ones were not, which ones were candidates loving, which ones were they not, which ones were later on they weren't loving, right after years, because I've been doing it so long. And so I really intimately learned a lot about franchising through that business.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I love, I mean, you and I have chatted about like founding Career Transition Lead, but saw a need, a massive need in the market, said somebody's got to fix this, and you said, well, might as well be me, right? I mean, that's a very short and almost crass explanation of how it started, but it's just like, this is kind of how your brain works, which is why I love chatting with you about stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you can't take all the credit. I was at that time working with the CRM program, actually, coincidentally, but way back when. And I remember saying, like, in talking to consultants, they needed this time, we need leads before we need a CRM. And I was fortunate to have the opportunity to just, co-found that business. And that business taught me a lot about how to run a business. It also taught me some mistakes I made along the way that, frankly, I would not be where I'm at right now without having learned and made those mistakes. So better to make them before you're a franchisor, though. So that's the good news.
Well, and the beauty of that position is you kind of have, I feel this way, because supplier in the franchising industry, I have such an interesting pane of glass I got to look through, because rather than a franchisor, and you're in that position now, right? But before you became a franchisor, you're looking through a pane of glass to see hundreds and hundreds of brands and who was doing it well and who was not doing it well. And so I feel like I've built up this best practice like library in my head of, oh, no. Like I literally told the guy this yesterday. I said, you can't have somebody do this thing. We were talking about his franchise development process, and he's fairly new to FranDev. He's got six units, and he was telling me he was going to do something. I was like, you can't do that, man. Like, you need to go talk to your franchise attorney, but I promise you, you need to wait 14 days. It's not 10 days. You can't do something in that 10-day window that would imply you're signing a contract, not even like an LOI or like an earnest payment or anything. It's got to be strictly 14 days. And he's like, are you sure? I'm like, I knew his attorney's like, go talk to Christian. He'll tell you. But the reality is, like, you get to see all of this stuff, and it makes you kind of wise if you pay attention. And so now you've got 8 years of just watching it through the glass as a broker, seeing the brands that are treating broker leads properly, following up, closing deals properly, supporting the franchise units properly. You got 8 years of purview across hundreds and hundreds of brands. I think if we can, let's bring it back to you and Playbook now for a second. How do you feel that pane of glass, that experience you've had, is kind of drawn into how you guys are formulating Franchise Playbook as an organization?
Well, at the time running that business, I had overseen my team of consultants and awarded over, like 60 LE territories and almost 70 all dry or some large amount of all dry restoration territories. And I learned a lot in seeing that LE, amazing business, but longer time to open. And then you looked at like restoration and quicker time to open, and understanding around this idea of being able to get into business quickly. I also almost bought a gym in right before COVID with my previous partner, and thankfully something fell through right before, and we really dodged a bullet. But I remember thinking, like, that personal guarantee on that lease really would have been the downfall, and saying, like, in the next business I get into, I don't want it to be this large investment. And so, well, the genesis of what happened was I exited the previous business in May of last year, and I knew I wanted to stay in franchising. I knew that I needed to do something different that was outside of what I had already done. And so on my list of things I could do was, one of them was franchisor, which was more of my 5-year out plan. I was going to do that when, 35, let's say, after doing my next thing. But that timeline moved a little sooner as I realized it really was the right time for me. Because I'll tell you, to be a franchisor, at least at the rate that we're moving, I was just thinking about this. I kid you not. It's like, you ever see Succession?
No.
It's a great show on Showtime. If you watch a show, they're pretty much always working. Like, there's always something going on. Like, I'm at that point now where it's like, I mean, from the minute I wake up, from the minute I go to sleep, other than dinner here and there, and probably still this is the craziest lift I've ever done. Like I've never worked so hard, like every day, 7 days a week. And yes, there's balance, but just right now to get this thing off the ground,
Mhm.
it's what it's taking us to move at the rate we're moving. And but here's the thing, in watching friends of mine that started franchisors, they told me what it was going to take, and but then seeing where they were able to get to, if I wasn't able to see where some of my friends in franchising were able to get to through these years, maybe I wouldn't have had the motivation, but I have that motivation because I know where we can go. And so Playbook, we launched in September, and I realized that as much as I knew about franchising, as much as I knew about FranDev or running a company, I didn't know a lot about being a franchisor.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so our co-founder and my partner, Zach Nolte, who's our COO, we had this amazing conversation, which really centered around me saying, hey, I know what I'm great at. I want to focus on vision and FranDev. And him saying, I would like to stay a bit out of FranDev and I want to focus on ops. And that relationship made us perfect. Now, granted, he's better at FranDev than he gives himself credit, because I've listened to him talk to candidates so far, which is awesome, because I don't know how many brands have a true seasoned COO who can also do FranDev, but and vice versa. But like, that was where that partnership made sense.
Mhm. Yeah, and I want to break that down for a minute, because you're describing a process a lot of people kind of stumble through accidentally. They assemble their executive team very unintentionally. Like, oh, hey, I'm a business operator. I've got this. Let's talk about let's not say painting. Let's say a plumbing business. I'm a great plumber. It's going well. I think I've got enough stuff designed that I can make this into a franchise. Hey, Bob, you're my head of operations. Why don't you be my franchisor COO? That transition sometimes is not very good. It's unintentional, right? But you did it the opposite way, and I kind of love that. But tell me, you mentioned this before. You're a franchisor that is starting a franchise, right? Like you started as a franchisor to start a franchise, not a business that became a franchisor and a franchise at the same time. This is one of the things I think makes it so different, the way you're approaching it.
Well, we were intentional. Like I tell people, we're not a new franchisor, we're just a new franchise.
Mhm.
And so like, when you cannot replace, I think in a lot of ways we have more experience than brands with 50 or even 100 units.
Mhm.
Because you have to look at, Zach has already managed a business with many, many units that had been in business for, he had president of that company for over, close to 10 years,
Yeah.
inherited the business's mistakes, was wanted to, from the previous owners, because it's a 40-year-old original business, Zach's previous company, you can't change franchising like that. And so there's certain mistakes of franchise, and I'm not saying that that's not an amazing franchise system,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
in being able to start a new system and say, hey, go write down everything you would do differently, and let's bring that in here. And then when the same thing with our CMO, Christian Betancourt, who was at brands like Anytime Fitness, Mayweather Boxing, Set Down, come to us with all this years of experience of what you saw was wrong, not just what you did, not what you did wrong, but what a system, and how we can improve it. And so we went in with this playbook from day one. We were able to avoid a lot of pitfalls. We also are fortunate to all have access to some tremendous mentors through the years.
Yeah.
And so some of the things that we've set up from day one, the enterprise value that we're creating, and more importantly, the pathway to success for franchisees is by design and very intentional. Whereas a lot of brands, they kind of like, they want to be a business. They're a business, they want to become a franchise, they franchise, then perhaps they match with an FSO, which is great. But just because you now have an FSO that can sell your units, that doesn't mean you know what you're doing with being a franchisor.
Yeah.
And so where I think what's a little bit unique about us is, although we're brand new, we could have 100 units tomorrow and we know what to do to run them in that sense. Like that's not a challenge. And so we're setting up our systems. We know how many field managers we need for every set of buyers. And we know how many, we have this, down to a playbook really.
Yeah, and you mentioned something just a second ago I want to come back to again. It's not just the executive team you assembled. You intentionally grabbed people like Zach is a freaky, talented operator, right? He knows how to run franchises. He knows how to coach them from 1 to 5 units, how to coach them, how to develop from 1 unit to 400 units. Like he knows the pathway. He also knows what not to do, which frankly I think is as valuable as what to do. He knows both because he's been through it. But you also mentioned something else which a lot of people don't think about. You're thinking about starting a franchise, or you want to grow your franchise seriously. You mentioned you guys all individually have really talented mentors. maybe can you share just for a second, like how has a mentor helped you? As you, even though you know a ton about the industry, you've been in it for a while, how have you found that that mentorship has really made you a way better professional and set up a way better system than you could have otherwise done?
Well, I would say one of my superpowers is being able to find and maintain mentorship relationships.
Mhm.
And I learned early in my life that if you want someone to mentor you, you have to give. It's a one-way relationship at first.
Mhm.
So like if I want someone to mentor me now that's further along, I just keep giving them things. And this guy's nuts. He just keeps reaching out. He keeps sending me books. He keeps doing something to help me. And I do that until eventually they crack and they help me. And not everyone wants to be a mentor, but I think every stage of your life, I'll have a mentor when I'm 60. There's always someone and they may be younger than me but further along in their business. And so I think that there's always someone that, could be a help to you. And, with launching Playbook, like I'll give an example, like I'll give him a shout out. Like, I've had great conversations with like Jeff Herr, which was he started St. Gregory Group, and St. Gregory was able to start, cycle bars and build that into what was then to turn into the foundation of Exponential. And people like don't always realize what like foundationally what that was, like cycle bars to then Exponential, what Exponential is today. And they really did the same a similar deal structure to what I wanted to do within home services. And so finding people that have done something you want to do, they've already done it, has kind of been a secret for me. And then finding someone that's doing it. So I've got people, and that's just one example of people that I talk with, but someone that's done it already. Then I've got people that are doing it, like Aaron Harper and we talk every single day,
Huh?
almost. My girl gets jealous. I'm just kidding. People, his wife gets jealous of us. We're on the phone, but I'm joking, of course. But we trade each other's wins, and all his mentors tap into mine, and so we're this brain share. And then finally, there's someone I give back to. So on our team, I've got people on the team that I'm teaching what I learned back to them, expediting their career, and a lot and good, let them move faster and avoid my mistakes. And so between someone who's done it, doing it, and never done it, you learn a lot that way.
Mhm. Awesome. Yeah, that's early in my career. I found the same thing was true. Like my very first professional job, I was working with, it was a Fortune 1000, probably a $300 million company at the time, on a rocket trip. We were just scaling, and the number one and number two enterprise sales guys for the whole enterprise, I was their inside sales guy. And I think back to that all the time, like, how was I so lucky? Because they were both totally different people, like Idaho farm boy and like super polished guy from the East Coast that had totally different styles, and they were both just crushing. They would trade first place in revenue generated. We're talking like big dollars too. We were working on deals with like Charles Schwab and Dell and like just huge organizations doing high-end systems management software. But I would pick their brain all the time. And I was better at some things than they were, and so they'd train me up so they could trust me, and then they showed me how to do it, and then they would let me do it, and I learned so much. And I wasn't even there that long, but mentorship has made a huge impact on my trajectory as far as what I was capable of doing and how fast I picked up what would make me successful.
Yeah, I just find, I agree. Like Jeff Herr, and there's Van Horn, and I can list the people, but like what you do is the same as me. Is you're genuinely curious, you want to learn, and a lot of people like enjoy sharing because remember they probably have a mentor and they have someone to give back to. As I told you, people don't always realize they're doing this, right? And so they're actually fulfilling their own growth pattern too because they're giving back to someone, which helps them become better, right? And so it isn't a one-way street. It's a given. You're helping each other like any relationship, really.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I want to shift gears a little if you're okay with it, Dan. So I mean, building the right team, you guys have clearly done that. You've built a team that can support a 400 unit franchise, but also build 10 400 unit franchises. That was the goal number one, is let's get the right team on board. But now you picked a brand. Can we talk about Voda for a minute? Is that okay? I'd love to learn a bit more about that journey. Like you guys looked at a lot of different concepts. Tell us, what were you looking for, and then why did you decide to pick Voda as your first marquee brand?
Yeah, sure. Well, the last thing I'll say about the team is like the team that we have and the executive leadership team, we needed people that could manage, 100 people, but could also be gritty and do whatever it takes. And like, I'll give Christian on our team better. Like he'll sit and edit green screen, even though he's a CMO that's run teams of people. He'll do whatever he has to do right now until we have the teammates and the resources to, because we're being scrappy. And so, and with that said, like I've put a good amount of capital into this to do it right, but like we're still going to always be cost effective and scrappy. So, people that could lead a bigger company, because I wanted them to grow with the company, but also could be scrappy right now. And so we've been very focused on that. And there's a whole thesis on how we're building our culture of people at Voda and Playbook. But quick story, started Franchise Playbook in September. I was at Springboard. That's where, Zach and I really started chatting, even though we had known each other for many years, and, started birthing the idea of Playbook, realizing that a platform made more sense in the long term, because I knew that I wanted to do something for the long term. Selling my business, happiest day I've had so far was I got the money, the wire, the Friday. The saddest day I've had so far was Saturday morning when I woke up because I lost my purpose. I mean it. I loved what I was doing. I'm glad to now be doing my next thing, but I know that if I were to sell this business, I would crave the same thing, which is to continue to build a company. And so Playbook is set up with more of a goal of a long-term, very long-term trajectory. And so the decision-making logic is also much more long-term. We're making decisions for 20 to 30 years out, even. At least that's how I feel the decisions are being made. And so when we set up Playbook, we identified that we wanted to be a platform in the long term, not tomorrow. I'm not saying that today, but we wanted to award franchises to people and them know the vision, so that we didn't, award 300 units and then come and say, hey, by the way, we're going to go do this other thing. Here's your new manager, or CEO of the franchise. We wanted to do it the right way, which is people buy into the vision today. And so we launched Playbook with the goal of having multiple brands in the next decade, but those brands will come much further, much faster toward the tail end of the decade. And so, sorry, long-winded, to answer your question, we started to create a playbook, which was, we wanted a business that was a need, not a want. Mm-hmm. We wanted a business that it was it was a non-discretionary spend. We wanted it to be, something that, like I said, a need, not want, a growing industry, simple to open, non-licensed employees, an investment in a certain range, item 19 in a certain, threshold. And, I can go on and on, but that starts to kind of get to a pretty tight, narrow, a narrow box of options.
Yeah.
And over time, you would look at industries and you'd say, you know what? Wow, restoration checked every single box. And so we started to pursue restoration.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we talked about 100 biz buy sell, traveling around. I was driving around everywhere, meeting with restoration founders. And that's the whole thing. You got to love the business. You got to love the founder. They got to want to do the deal. You have to kiss a lot of frogs. So during acquisition mode, we kissed a lot of frogs until we found the Voda brand, the Voda business.
Yeah. And what was unique there? I mean, you mentioned that there's got to be a fit, right? Industry fit. I love it. That's a great industry. Working capital to get started, not too intense, right? A vehicle, some fans, some equipment, right? And then training know-how, et cetera. Get a license if you need one, but it's not even like a licensed business in most states, right? So lower threshold to a barrier for entry, but why Voda? Because you mentioned kissing frogs, meaning you had to find the right person that was running the right business in the right industry, right? So that's a pretty tight match and a very small pool of people that would meet your needs. What was different about Voda?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I tell this story like the movie The Founder with Michael Keaton. He's, I was never expecting what happened. So I had gotten a call and connected to a brand that I could go look at in Virginia. So on a Monday morning at 6 a.m., I left and, headed out to, whatever time, early in the morning, we headed out to meet him. Mm-hmm. And I planned this to be a day trip. I live in New York City. I could get there in, 4 hours, meet for lunch, see the facility, drive back. And pretty quickly realized that there was something special. One, in the relationship that just seemed to click immediately between the founder and I. There's some type of, good chemistry or whatever you want to call it. And then more importantly, or equally important, the systems that he had already put in place in this business. And then most important was the fact that while I loved restoration, the only negative about restoration is because insurance pays, so there's a lag in time, and because there's water incidences that can be somewhat spotty, even though it's 14,000 water damage incidences every single day.
Mhm.
I didn't
Yeah.
like the fact that there was lumpiness in the revenue.
Yeah.
And I wanted recurring revenue or some level of predictability to revenue. And so what Voda was doing, what the company was doing that was different was they were doing carpet and floor cleaning, building up predictable revenue, while their restoration business was all like gravy or icing on the cake because they had the carpet cleaning getting into homes and the businesses first.
I love it. Well, and the reason why you care, right? So it's easy for people to look at this now and say, well, you're a franchisor, so why do you care about lumpiness of revenue? Is it just because of royalties? But that's not it. I remember you telling me about this earlier on. Why was it so important for you guys to find this model and then to see this piece where they solved the lumpiness of the revenue? Why did you care so much about that?
Well, first of all, like again, restoration is an amazing industry. If you start a restoration business, I think you have a great success. Whatever franchise you choose, or if you do it on your own, I think it's going to be great for you. It's a $200 billion industry growing, 6% year or 5% year over year. They actually say that commercial is 210, residential is another 90, and the whole thing is 300 billion. Now, restoration is a broad term. There's water, fire, mold. You could go down to what we do, which is water mitigation. That's within that restoration. It's a subcategory. That's a $17 billion industry, also growing at like 6% year over year.
Yikes. Yeah. Wow.
And, I joke like, global, whether there's global warming or not, people have different opinions. The temperatures, I think they're getting warmer. Either way, there's always floods. There's always disasters. But remember, it's not just talking about floods. We're talking about your pipes breaking in an old home or someone leaving the bathtub. And so the average home infrastructure is getting older too, causing more water damage.
Yeah. Which means it's an industry rife for growth. And it also means at the unit level, you guys are going to have successful franchisees. Like there are so many concepts out there you guys could have picked, but at the end of the day, if you don't have a successful franchisee, you don't have a successful franchise.
Well, right. I mean, for us, like there was a certain margin threshold. Like this business has in the I-19 a 1.7 gross and a 32% net. Now that 32% net includes a manager running the day-to-day in that number. A manager in the number, 32%. Okay. Now, of course, there's royalties now. But for me, we needed to be in a business that with that 32% after royalties and in the business imputed into this item 19, you're at a 23% net margin on the item 19 with a manager in place. Mm-hmm. But again, if you didn't have that high margin business, then how can you sustain the royalty, right? And so for a franchisee, and so we wanted to be in a business where franchisees were happy making money. Our royalty stream made sense. The reason I didn't want the lumpy revenue is not about me, but about the franchisees having a business where they're happy, they can get started, up and operational 39 days. And then the last thing I'll say about that is I knew that we could do great lead gen around restoration. I actually say we're a lead generation company that happens to sell restoration and cleaning services.
Yeah, that makes
sense.
But
we liked with carpet cleaning. I can't convince you to suck out water of your basement that didn't flood. Can't persuade you. No. But with carpet, we can, through our really robust lead acquisition strategy and with repeat customers, with about 30% of the business is repeat customers, you can convince someone and value add to clean more carpets if you want to grow the business.
Yeah, it's true. Even despite the fact that it might be the driest summer on history, and there's not as much maybe pipe damage, water damage, leaks, etc. That I love that. You want to grow the business, great, grow the business, get another van, so, send out more flyers, do your marketing, get more floors cleaned. That's
demand generation for floor and carpet. Yeah, exactly.
Yep, it's perfect. And so you said 30% of that side of the business is repeat customer business. That's huge. I mean, it's not. You can't quite call it recurring revenue, but it's almost the same as creating a recurring revenue model with your one-time lumps of the restoration work, which I kind of love.
Well, and again, that gives a testament to the founder for the systems that are in place. Like he has systems in our flagship that recalling every day, right as the job ends, the next day they call. And we ensure that the customer is happy. And if they're even the slightest bit of a complaint, even if they're not asking anything, they go back in the truck and we fix it. And putting those same systems into place for us. Like, for example, we have a national call center that answers the phone and books the jobs. And we're setting up systems where we then call back, do the same thing, make sure they're happy, send the truck back if they're not, call back every few months to check in about the cleaning. These are the things that drive that repeat business.
Yeah, I love it. And that's back to the fundamentals, like as a franchisor, rather than creating a business model that you could sustain and build and grow, and then it became awesome. You guys went out and found one that was already amazing, but had the potential for anyone who's running in the franchise system to be very successful and also be able to control the two sides of a business, right? You can go get more referrals for restoration water damage, but you can genuinely build a sustainable and predictable revenue model with carpet cleaning, which is awesome. I know several restoration brands that don't have that option, right? It's, hey, go get more referrals, and if there's no flooding, revenue's down, and it's out of our control a little bit. But this I love, the way you guys balance that out.
Yeah, well, thank you. And but on that topic, being a lead generation company that happens to sell restoration, what we do have in place is this idea of like, I ran a call center with a lot of people. Call center is probably my core competency at the root and around lead gen. And so we have this ability to reach out proactively to plumbers, property managers, insurance agents through phone, email, text, and mail, and open up doors of opportunity for franchisees to then build those referral relationships. And, I had that in my first franchise system. They had a service that mailed and called on business owners, and it was still up to me to close the deal. But like, it's nice when you don't have to make a bunch of cold calls. And so, we do a lot around creating those referral channels.
That's pretty powerful, man. I mean, almost secret sauce stuff. So I'm grateful you're sharing that. But taking your core competence that you developed over the last decade, calling, outbound calling, then call center management, lead generation, and infusing that into a brand. What's the number one challenge that most service-oriented brands struggle with? It's lead gen, right? Lead gen, getting people through the door, or getting people to fill out a form and say, hey, I need you to come and paint my house or clean my windows, or whatever that service might be, walk my dog. It doesn't matter. That's the number one challenge most of them face. It's not selling the deal and delivering the service. That's what everyone's trained to do. But I love that you guys are addressing that the top of funnel challenge that ultimately results in a lot of dollars for your franchise operators. That's cool, man. Tell me, so if you've been through the flow now, can you share with us, like, what were some of the early lessons that you learned where you thought you had it figured out and you said, oops, let's take a step back, that wasn't right, I got to do this again? What were some of those early lessons you learned?
Oh, man. I mean, if you don't want to learn and enjoy embracing some mistakes and lessons, then don't be an entrepreneur, right? It's not the thing to do. Lots of them. The one thing we did right is we committed ourselves to the relationship with the founder, our founder of the business, and that got us through any challenges in negotiating, because it's a complex deal that we put together. And because we were so focused, and that's always been my focus in any relationship in business, like, is to put the relationship first before money. If you can do that, you can usually get through most things. I don't think you can get through everything. I've learned that, but you can usually get through things. And, for me, like, I definitely have had enough experience in business to know that I don't want to ever have a legal dispute or, go down that path with anyone. And so what I do now is I've learned that agreements are the most important agreement's the most important thing you can do. You have to do it. And so Zach and I basically said, look, we're going to commit to the relationship. And we were having high level conversations around exciting ideas around the business and going out to dinner with each other's families with the founder, while the next day really getting into material language around the agreements. And I wouldn't let anything slide, nor would their sophisticated counsel. And I've learned that you cannot let even a word slide. Every word has to be perfect for both parties, because unfortunately, no matter what, if there is an issue, you don't have to, if it's done properly, you don't have to go to the legal route, because the paperwork just tells you, look, this is what you signed. It's clear as day. And, that's it. And so I think, like, I've become a lot less of a handshake person and more of a, let's put this exactly into writing how it's supposed to be. So if there's ever a disconnect, we just go to the piece of paper. And then that doesn't mean I'm going to hold someone to paper and, be a litigious person, but instead let's focus on the relationship. Let's never pull out that agreement, but let's make sure that it is written so that we're fully on the same page. And I think that's the biggest lesson that we learned, not in the sense that we did it wrong, but I'm really glad that we made that commitment to the relationship.
Yeah, I think you did it right too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with documenting the way things are supposed to run. That's ultimately what a contract is, right? Whether it's a purchase agreement or whatever you're doing. I tend to be I'm an Illinois farm boy, so I tend to be a bit of a handshake guy. But man, I will bend over backward if there's a misunderstanding. I like to say, well, is it reasonable? Like I tend to put that relationship in the same spot. Like, well, is it possible that we misconstrued or that they misunderstood? And if so, can we own some of it and make sure we take care of it? But I agree with you. Big things, we're talking about lots of zeros. If you don't have it all locked up, that's a really smart piece of advice.
Well, let's be, frank too. It usually the person you got into business with, you got into because they are trustworthy, or they are trustworthy. There's very few times, I believe, that when people are in a dispute with each other, that one person is saying, I'm going to screw this guy over. I can't wait to, just do the wrong thing here. I don't think that's the case. I think both people's perspective is probably right for a lot of reasons. There was a misunderstanding of each other, and they both are entitled to where they feel. That's how I feel. And so, like, there's a lot of times there's just unclarity or you misunderstood something, and that's why the agreement is so important to me. And we took our time with that. It took like 120 days to make sure it was done well. But I joked when it was done that our lawyers knew it was going to be a really big company because they made sure it was perfect when we did the deal.
Yeah. Well, if you could, never mind. I was going to make a joke about lawyer spends, but that's actually, if you don't mind, we won't talk about dollars and cents there, but there's an expense, right? Like, and you talked about investing a lot in the company, but if you want a company that's going to thrive 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the line, if you don't have to go back and revisit paperwork and rebuild Rome, right? Because you built it right the first time, that's a lot of money and time you're not wasting as you could be scaling and growing. But you have to be willing to invest it, and that's, I think, an area where a lot of people want to cut corners. They want to go get like a rocket lawyer, agreement off the internet, and then tweak a few things or using templates from somebody. But I mean, could you maybe comment on that for a second? Like, why was it so important to you, aside from not having any sort of conflicts, right? Maintaining the relationship, but why else was that such an important asset to build right the first time?
Well, it's funny because what people got to know about me is over this past year, I've become like a legal, I don't know. I think I could go to law school and be my own lawyer. I've gotten pretty good. I don't actually sign anything without I will not sign even a material change, like a little change. It always goes right back to my attorney. And like, I'll never make that, I've made that mistake before. I'll never make it again. And I just tell people that. And like, I think what happens is I'm so clear about that then they get a great attorney, and that's good to me. Like, if with our franchise, I want people, listen, I can't control what people do, but I say when someone's looking at buying our franchise, which thankfully we've got a lot of people as we start for such a short period of time, I'm saying to make sure you get a franchise attorney toward the end. Like, I'm not saying we're going to change much here because it's a pretty standard agreement, but you know what you signed, because that goes back to the point I was saying. I think your question was, I wouldn't cheap out when it comes to legal, because if you think a cheap attorney, or if you think an attorney is expensive now, wait till you have to pay for a cheap one. I think the saying is something like that.
Wait till you have to use one for real, right? That's man, I couldn't agree with you more, because what's going to cost more, spending the extra 20, 30, 40, $50,000 to get the agreement right? That's ironclad, or your first litigation, if it ever comes up. If your contract's done right, that never happens unless you are grossly negligent in some regard. But if you're responsible, it never happens either. So because they'll know, somebody wants to do something, let's say a franchisee gets mad, they take it to their attorney looks at it, and they'll be like, dude, go home. Like, here's your free consultation. Don't waste your time and money. And that's what you want. You want them to operate in a safe space, and you want to operate in a safe space. I think it's critical, and people overlook that a lot.
I agree. And I learned that, it's a good business person, to be that way. And I even, yeah, there's no emotion to it. Like that's the other thing. Like you have to realize, like anything that happens to me at this point in business, I don't take emotion. I have no emotion in any way to it. I save my emotions for at home. And that's a lesson that I think if you can learn, the sooner you can learn, the faster you'll move.
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm thinking about some of the things that we've talked about today, Dan. Let's maybe do a summary. I'll share a couple of things that stood out to me, and then if you don't mind, maybe a couple of summary points about, if you're a franchisor, or you're thinking of becoming a franchisor, like what should you be doing right now? But I think getting an ironclad agreement in place, it's worth the time and money. Absolutely. Also, we talked about building good, strong relationships with the original founders and making sure that because that's going to carry you through lots of stuff. I'm a big believer in that in any aspect of life, coaching, parenting, whatever the case may be. Right? It's all about that because ink on paper can only do so much, right? But sometimes you just have to look each other in the eyes and say, yeah, I get it. This isn't quite right. Let's adjust. Times have changed. Let's strike that and write something new. But the other thing is getting a leadership team in place that's intentional, the right people that can scale with you, that are willing to be gritty, but also have the capacity to manage large teams. Those are unicorns. And I look at what you've assembled with Franchise Playbook, and I'm like, you got a whole pen of unicorns kind of champing at the bit right now. And I think that's a really impressive, but also an important part about building a system that can last, is getting the right humans that have the capacity to operate today and be gritty, and then build something together.
Yeah.
But what would you add to that, Dan? Give us a couple of parting thoughts for anyone else thinking who's just sadistic enough to become an entrepreneur and a franchisor entrepreneur on top of that, right? What would you advise them to do?
Well, I think you really have to commit to like at least a 36-month like total lifestyle change. I've had to change my lifestyle a lot. I was used to a certain income and a certain, lifestyle. And I was spoiled, I think, because I didn't realize how often I was, hanging out on a daytime as a business owner, my previous business, going to lunch. There's no lunch for me right now. No, it's lunch. I eat lunch, but like in this desk. But I got a team of people that do the same thing, and we're working hard. I think at the end of the day, if you're going to start a franchise, or if since we're talking about, you better really enjoy the helping people become a business owner and like that longer term vision, and really enjoy your team. Like the Playbook team has become like my like good friends. Like we enjoy talking and working together and joking around. And so I think putting core values really high on your list, and then making a culture around those core values. When I first got into business, I thought a lot of that was like, nonsense, core values. But I actually remember Zach and I, that's like the first things we did. It's interesting. Like if I'll leave you with this, the way that we built Voda from the time of acquiring it, rebranding it, assembling the team and launching it, I'm fascinated by how much we did in such a short period of time, and it was smooth. After we launched, I actually just had this conversation around, guys, now we got a lot going on, but we got to continue to do the same exact thing. Let's block it out. Let's get in a room. Let's whiteboard what the next 3 months needs to be, prioritize it and do it. And we could be smooth, just like that launch was.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be my biggest lesson right now in this past few weeks is continue to always like slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And that like, it's easy to lose sight of that with the action, because when you launch a franchise, everybody's excited and coming at you, but you got to just remember, like, you got to stick to your plan and not diverge from it too much.
Yeah, and just a quick question on that: Are you guys operating using any sort of particular process or system like EOS or anything like that, or what are you guys using to build structure around this, core values and systematizing your processes?
So we operate on EOS.
Okay.
But I found when things got busy in the past few weeks, it's easy to say, hey, let's get off that. We got all these things. No, you got to stick to EOS. You got to slow it down. You got to tell people around you that want a decision, like, hey, we're decisive, but we're not going to make a decision. So the biggest thing I learned, Dave, in running a young business that's growing fast at this rate, I've never run a business growing at this rate, is you have to embrace your nimbleness and ability to make things happen, but also understand that could be your Achilles heel if you don't be extremely cognizant of it, right? If someone on the team says, "Oh, something in we use client tether, love client tether, it's going amazing," I highly recommend anyone listening. And I'm not doing that as a he's not paying me. I love I love what we've I love the tool, but what I was gonna say is, but like if there was one thing that you needed to fix, like we don't jump off the CRM to another tool, right? Like there's a process, and you need to fix it quickly, but not today, right? And so like this is where I think like when you're running a business, you got to be urgent, but understand that sometimes things take time.
Yeah, well, we sure appreciate that, because it's easy. Entrepreneurs tend to be a little ADHD, right? And so if you can curb that enough to know, okay, which quadrant are we in? Is it on fire, like urgent and important, or is this a priority that's important but not urgent? Like being able to balance those things is important, and we find EOS helps us with that a lot. Like, hey, there's a process now. Like we're a technology company. Urgent thing comes up. All right, how soon can we slide it into the process? Not how soon can we get it done? Because we used to just pants on fire. Let's get done. Let's get done. We want to take care of everybody, and actually created more problems and backlog and churn. Not churn with customers, just like effort that we were just burning constantly. And then create a process, stick to the process, follow the model, and like you said, you gotta smooth is slow, or slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. I was just talking to my son about that in baseball, but it's true in business. So these are great words of wisdom. I'm excited to see what you guys do 12 months from now. We should circle back and say, what did we learn in 12 months? Because you're learning at such a rate right now that I imagine you'll have a lot to share.
Well, that's yeah, agreed. And just as we wrap up, like that, what you just said, like what is it saying? Like people underestimate what they can do in a week, and they overestimate what they can do in a week and underestimate what they can do in a year. Or I think maybe it's a year and what they can do in 10. Like just like keep in mind that like this, if you're going to franchise, it's there's some level of being a sprint, because you have to get some units open and there's a level of sprint to it. But it's really more of like I don't know the type of race, but it's a long race. It's not a short race.
Yeah.
It's a marathon, but you got to run the first pace a little bit faster for some reason. You got to get it. You got to get out of the startup phase.
The herd. Yeah, there's a big herd. You got to break out of that herd so you can keep your own pace. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I hear you.
And the last thing I'd say is don't be so worried about not having franchisees. There's a lot of positive to being an emerging brand. And I think the right franchise candidates actually start to come to you and realize that. I have people reaching all the time around, I want to be an emerging brand. I don't want to be in a larger brand.
Yeah, that sounds like another podcast episode in and of itself, because that's true. That's true. I look at franchise concepts all the time with our clients and say, like the big ones are great. Like they got structure and big parties and all these cool things and great item 19s, but there's something that I like about being early, almost like it's almost like being a micro co-founder where you're like, hey, I'm gonna help you work out the kinks, man. I want to contribute. I want to think. I want to innovate with you as we build the brand. Like I like that more, honestly.
You really are. You are like you're a co-creator with the franchise, and that's why we mapped your Utah, territory while you're coming to Confirmation Day, like you said before recording this. I'm just kidding.
Oh man, I love it. Love it.
That would be a pretty good testimony.
It would be. Yeah, and I wouldn't mind coming. But yeah, dude, I love what you're building. Then let's wrap on that note, and maybe one day I will come out to Confirmation Day. I'm not going to say it's not a possibility. You never know. Cool, man.
Well, thanks again for having me.
Appreciate you.